So we equally have types of supply, just like we have types of demand, we have types of supply. We have three types in this case. We have competitive supply. What is competitive supply? Competitive supply is when two or more products are produced using the same resources, so that an increase in the production of one leads to a reduction in the supply of the other. This one is like supply of factors of production. Let's take land. If you use land, land can be used for various things. If you use land to build a house now, a piece of land, if you use it to build a house, it should not be available for farming again. You cannot use it to build schools or churches, whatever. So competitive supply is supply for factors of production. Supply of those for a commodity that has alternative uses. This is usually the case with factors of production. Then we have joint supply. Joint supply. Joint supply occurs when two or more commodities are produced and supplied from the same source. In the process of producing one commodity, the other commodities are automatically produced. What's an example of this? Example is palm oil, palm kernel, baskets, brooms. They all come from palm tree. Another example is when you look at fuel, gasoline, kerosene, they all come from crude oil. After processing, in the case of processing crude oil, all these things are fallout. So they are jointly supplied from the same source. So we said that joint supply occurs when two or more commodities are produced and supplied from the same source. As one of these things are produced, the other ones are equally produced, automatically produced. Finally is composite supply. Composite supply occurs when a commodity is capable of being used for two or more purposes. When a commodity is being used for two or more purposes, we say it has a composite supply. An increase in its demand for use in any of the uses will likely increase its availability in the other use. Example, we say that composite supply occurs when two commodities are capable of being, when a commodity is capable of being used for two or more purposes. Example, I've given an example with them. We said commodities in composite supply are substitutes. That is, they compete with one another. Examples, the need for beverages could be met from various sources such as tea, coffee, Milo, Bonvita, Ovaltine. Also, MTN, Glo, Airtel all satisfy the same need. So these composite supply are need for substitute. These are competing. They are competing for your satisfaction. Composite supply. So you can buy one and leave the other. Now let's look at factors affecting supply. One of the factors affecting supply is price of the commodity. Like we said, the prices of commodity and supply move in the same direction. As price of a commodity increases, quantity supplied of it increases, and vice versa. Also, prices of other commodities affect supply. A rational producer will prefer to supply more of a commodity whose price rises and less of that whose price remains constant. Put differently, a rise in the price of other commodities would make their production more profitable, all things being equal. If a particular product, assuming we are looking at beverages, and the price of one increases, many producers will switch over to that whose price has increased and forget about the one they were producing before. So prices of other commodities will affect supply. And in that case, once they now shift to the one whose prices had increased, supply will increase. Also, technology affects supply. An improvement in technology will raise the productivity of inputs and increase production, all things being equal. As production increases, supply would increase. Number of producers will affect supply. The more producers we have, the more supply will increase. So the lesser the number of producers, the greater the supply, and vice versa. So cost of production is one of the factors affecting supply. cost of production. Before you go into production, of course, there are inputs. Cost of production is the totality of the inputs, everything, even paying your workers, when you put them down. Once the cost of production is high, discourages production. And once production is discouraged, supply decreases. So, a rise in input prices would increase the cost of production. All things being equal, production will decrease and supply will also decrease. Government policy is also affecting supply. Example, taxation, subsidy. If government gives subsidy to save farmers, of course, production will increase. There will be increase in farm production. And once the government reduces taxation, if government still wants to encourage producers, it does that by reducing taxation so as to encourage them to produce more. But if taxation increases, it means it will increase cost of production, and that will deter producers from producing more, and it will have a negative effect on supply. Weather conditions also affect supply. Favorable weather conditions and the absence of natural disaster or natural hazard, such as flood, drought, will lead to a bountiful harvest and higher productivity and the increase in supply of products. So once there's favorable weather condition, there'll be bounty harvest. Farm produce will increase. Farm supply will increase. But if there's adverse weather conditions, if there's flooding that sweeps away people's agricultural produce, of course, you will have an adverse effect on productivity and will lead to decrease in supply. Pests and diseases, one of the other factors affecting supply. Pests and diseases are farmers' enemies. Once they're able to infest the farmers' farms, it will reduce productivity for the year. Natural disaster also affects supply. Once there's natural disaster that affects so many things, productivity will reduce and supply will reduce. So those are factors affecting supply. Those things that factors affecting supply, those things that will make the producers or sellers to either increase or decrease their production. The other time we looked at difference between changes in quantity supplied, and we looked at difference between changes in quantity demanded and quantity supplied. So here we are going to look at under supply. We are equally looking at differences between changes in quantity supplied and change in supply. Once you're able to grasp what I taught you in that other one, this one is just a mere repetition of it. Only that wherever you see supply, wherever you see demand, remove it and put supply. So what is the difference between change in quantity supplied and change in supply? Change in quantity supplied, just like we said, change in demand, is brought about by just one factor, and that factor is change in price of the commodity. When there's a change in price, when there's a change in quantity supplied, once there is a change in quantity supplied, there's a movement along the same supply curve, either upwards or downwards. And other factors affecting supply are held constant. You can see from this table. Once there's a change, initially the price was P1, quantity supplied Q1. Now, if the price increased from P1 to P2, quantity supplied increased from Q1 to Q2. As price continues to increase to P3, quantity supplied increased to Q3. While there's a movement along this same supply curve from B to A and from A to C. When there's a movement from A to B, it depicts an increase in price from P2 to P3. Will elicit an increase in quantity supplied from Q2 to Q3. But if the price decreases from P2 to P1, quantity supplied will decrease from Q2 to Q1. That is what we call change in quantity supply. Now, changes in supply. Change in supply is brought about by all the factors affecting supply except price. Price is held constant. Price is held constant. We can see this is the diagram for change in supply. We have change, like I said, change can be either increase or decrease. So change in supply is either increase in supply or decrease in supply. Figure 1 says here we have an increase in supply. Once there's increase in supply, what happens? It means at the same price, P0 here, the price is held constant. Initially, at this point, P0, quantity supplied and demanded was Q0. This is the point of equilibrium. Now, at the same price, P0, there was a shift of the demand curve, of the supply curve from S0 to S1, S1. And the quantity supplied increased from Q0 to Q1. Why? What must have caused it? This shift must have been as a result of increase in number of, let's say, farmers, increase in number of producers, decrease in cost of production, favorable weather condition, and what have you. Those factors affecting supply, except price. Price is constant. Now, when there's a decrease in supply, there's a shift of the supply curve inwards. Supply curve shifts inward. That means there's a contraction in supply. Once there's a decrease in price, or rather, once there's a decrease in supply, it means that there's a contraction of the supply. Now, originally, we have price being P0 and quantity supplied being Q1. Initially, the supply was S1, S1. Now, when there's a contraction, because decrease in supply depicts contraction in supply. When there's a contraction in supply, there's a movement, a shift of the supply curve from inwards, from S1, S1 to S2, S2, meaning there's a contraction. But increase means an expansion in supply. And when there's an expansion in supply, there's a shift of the supply curve outwardly, while a decrease in supply elicits an increase, a decrease, a movement, a shift inwards from S1, S1 to S2, S2. So that is that. It's either you must use these diagrams to illustrate, because in the exam you might be asked with the aid of diagrams. With the aid of diagrams, differentiate between changes in supply and changes in quantity supplied. So you must use your diagram, these diagrams, to buttress your point. You see that when you're illustrating change in supply, you see that you use these two diagrams, or you can compact them in one. You can use this one diagram to illustrate either increase or decrease. This is change in supply. This is original supply, original quantity supplied, S0, S0. This is the original diagram, supply curve, while the quantity, this is the point of equilibrium, Q0. Once there's an increase in supply, it means there's an expansion, and there will be an outward movement of the supply curve from S0, S0 to S2, S2. This one depicts an expansion, an increase in supply. But when there's a contraction or a decrease in supply, the supply curve shifts inwards from S0, S0 to S1, S1. Okay, so we're looking at abnormal or exceptional supply curve. Like I told you, normal supply curve slopes upwards from left to the right. It's positively sloped. But when you see a supply curve that is not positively sloped, if it slopes downwards from left to the right, or it has a curve like this, it becomes abnormal. So abnormal supply curve is a supply curve that does not obey the rule of supply. So here we are using it to depict this. Once you see something like this, backward sloping supply curve, we're using to depict what happens in labor. On the vertical axis, we have the wage rate. On the horizontal axis, the number of hours worked. You can see that initially, as the wage rate increases, the number of hours increases. Look at it. When it was 100 naira. 1 hour was put in. As the wage rate increased to 300 naira, 3 hours was put in. Increases to 400, 5 hours was put in. At 500 naira, about 7 hours was put in. And as it continues to increase, to say 600 naira, the workers say, no, we can no longer, we have need for our leisure. We will not work all day long without having our rest. So it means that as wage rate increases, continues to increase, time will come when the workers will resist it. They prefer their leisure time. They want to use part of their time to rest. It will not be all work. And that will it will now makes the demand curve to look slant backward. Like a supply curve, you can see it. So if you go, hey, the backward sloping supply curve for labor. Supply of labor is measured in hours put to work. It is usual with labor to supply more services when wage is high. But such increase in labor supply will reach a point where labor will prefer leisure. At such point, supply of labor will fall, even at higher wages, as can be seen in figure A above. It is clear that as the wage rate increases from 100 naira to 400 naira per hour, the worker increases the number of hours worked, but from 1 hour to 6 hours a day. The supply curve over this stretch is quite normal, as the worker substitutes work for leisure in response to the higher wage rates offered. When the highest income is attained at the wage of 400 naira, the supply curve bends backwards towards the price axis, as the labor market experiences the income effect. After that point, the worker puts in fewer hours and trades off extra pay for more leisure. That is, they feel they require more leisure to enjoy the money. It will not be all work and no play. So that is, the first one is the abnormal. This is one of abnormal demand curves, supply curves. Anything that looks like this is abnormal. Another thing that is, look at this, an abnormal supply curve could be negatively sloped. If you see any supply curve that is like this, it is very, very abnormal. It is only the demand curve that is like this. So a supply curve that slopes downwards, a supply curve that is negatively sloped is abnormal. Because normally, once price decreases, supply does not increase. But in this case, you can see as price decreases, supply increases. It's very, very abnormal. So expectations of a continuous change in price brings about a negatively sloping supply curve. Expectations of continuous change in price. If people are still, if producers are anticipating that prices will continue to go down and down and down and down, they will continue to supply even at the prevailing low price. Finally, note that the law of supply states that at higher prices, more will be supplied, and at lower prices, less will be supplied. 2, increased supply will lead to a fall in price, and reduced supply will increase price. So attempt the following questions. 1, what is abnormal demand? 2, state 3 reasons for occurrence of abnormal demand. 3, define the concept supply in economics. 4, list the types of supply. 5, state 5 factors affecting supply. Now these are the answers to those questions.